Have you ever listened to a podcast or watched a documentary about what's happening to our climate and thought, wow, this is huge. So what do I do? But then they don't even tell you and they just roll the credits and then you shrug and go to bed and can't sleep.
This is not that kind of podcast. This is about doing stuff that will get you out of anxiety and into action, because it's pretty hard to do anything productive when you're cowering in the fetal position, which is where we were at the start of 2020.
I just go from being so charged up and wanting to take action and then like the whole country's on fire, so everything I do seems pointless and futile, and then I fall into despair and
it's just completely overwhelming and there's so much to do.
I just want to make the future beautiful.
Should we quit driving?
Go vegan?
Do the power-saving light bulb
so,
thing?
I mean, like, obviously I should stop flying.
Turn off all the PowerPoints,
use a
environmental
keep cup.
charities, but
which one?
Don't use paper.
Don't even use toilet paper.
Too late
just
anyway.
Like breathe less. Like,
does it even make a difference anyway?
Mass extinction. Mass extinction.
So just for a moment, let's put all of that advice to one side and just take a breath. I'm seeing a great breath being taken there. That's a great deep breath.
So glad you're here, David Ritter, CEO of Greenpeace Australia Pacific.
I was about to lose hope.
Above all, hope is having a plan of what to do. And, we've got a plan of what to do. We've got a plan. We've got a plan. We've got a plan. We've got a plan.
David?
Where'd he go?
Where'd he go?
Come back. David?
Oh, I need a plan.
I really hope he comes back. Hello, fellow human. I'm Ash.
And I'm Jess. And we're two mates on a mission to do something about this climate crisis. We've all got a lot of questions.
Yeah, climate change keeps me awake at night.
Like I have a keep cup and I try to recycle. Well, I do recycle. But where does that go anyway,
Tried to watch the recent David Attenborough documentary on Netflix and I couldn't finish watching it.
The biggest question I have is whether or not it's ethical to have children at this point in time.
I often find it far too overwhelming to even think about.
In this podcast, we want to figure out the best things that we can do to make the world heaps better. Then do them together, because we're heaps better together.
And to help us out, we're tapping into the brilliant minds of our planet-saving friends at Greenpeace Australia Pacific. Before we blindly rush into saving the planet, let's consider the amazing legacy of sustainability and caring for country of our first people.
We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we make this podcast.
In my part of Sydney, I pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
And for me, it's the Narragansett people, the traditional custodians of the New South Wales Snowy Mountains. We extend our respects to any First Nations people listening.
We live among the oldest continuing culture in the world. We have a lot to learn.
We also want to acknowledge the grief and despair that climate change brings, and generally the year of 2020.
I mean, it started with bushfires and we whizzed on into COVID, and that's kind of how we started doing this podcast, like every other man and his dog.
Yeah, Ash and I got together right at the start of 2020 and made a pinky promise to help each other stay sane, figure out what we could do that would actually make a difference, and do things that make you feel good, like you are right now, Ash.
Oh, you mean with like my
Your
you call
finger
my finger harp? I mean, what do you play a finger? Wait, okay. So what else do you play a harp with? Like a toe harp?
So anyway, whatever you do for a bit of self-care, but also we hear action is the antidote to despair. But we're not activists. We're not scientists. We're not battery engineers. We're just normal old people.
Yeah.
So where do we start?
I mean, who should we listen to about climate change?
I've got this hilarious sort of mattress pillow set up around me at the moment because there are like 70k winds howling outside.
Wonderful.
Which is kind of perfect for speaking to an extreme weather expert, but not so great for a podcast recording. Ash, I found us a climate scientist.
Show me her research papers. Is she really real?
Yes, they're called things like embracing the complexity of extreme weather events when quantifying their likelihood of recurrence in a warming world.
Okay, so this is the kind of person we should be listening to.
Mm-hmm. Who are you and what do you do?
Okay, yep. So who am I today? Who am I right now? A couple of hours ago I was a mother, but now I can be a scientist. So my name's Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick. I research extreme weather events, but I mainly focus on heat waves.
I hope this isn't too much of a personal question, and feel free not to answer it if it is, but has becoming a mother changed how you go about your job or how you feel about the job that you're doing?
I was a climate scientist before I had a family. But when I was pregnant with my first daughter, it was a pretty bad summer at the time. And I remember sitting in a conference and having a health expert talk about the health impacts of heat waves in 35 years' time. So basically when my daughter is my age. And here I am thinking, this poor child, she's not done anything and she's going to bear the brunt of this. This is completely unfair. And it put me in a bit of a dark space for a while. I was thinking, why am I doing this? I've wanted to be a parent for so long, yet I'm bringing this child into a world that it's shit, basically, and she's not contributed to it. It's completely unfair. But I then had a colleague tell me that child might be the one that can make a significant difference in reducing our emissions or keeping our emissions low, whatever the world might look like when she's my age. And that was a bit of a wake-up call. I thought, well, that is a good point. We can't necessarily think always about how bad it's going to be.
Imagine explaining climate change to your child as a climate scientist.
Yeah, well, I asked her to tell me how it all works. Real simple.
Naturally, we have a certain amount of what we call greenhouse gases. They're just certain gases in the atmosphere, of which carbon dioxide is one. There's also a number of others. And what they do in really simplistic terms is create kind of like a blanket in the lower 10 kilometres of the atmosphere. So they trap in a bit of heat into that part of the atmosphere. It's kind of like when you put a blanket on at night.
Oh, a blanket. I feel a bedtime story coming on.
Ash, is now the time.
I can't help it, Jess. The metaphor, it calls to me. Once upon a time, there was a little planet called Earth. Earth was just the perfect distance from the sun for life to flourish. Not too close to get toasted, not too far to get freezing, but just right. And space around it was a little cold. Luckily, Earth had a little blanket around it to keep it warm. But seriously, we're in what scientists call the Goldilocks Zone. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And it also helps that we have this nice tilt and reliable seasons and a certain amount of warmth from those gases in the atmosphere. So everything has been just right and stable for thousands and thousands of years. It's like a nice little baby bear porridge for life to flourish in. But then the Industrial Revolution happened and we started burning fossil fuels for energy.
What we're doing with our way of life is increasing the thickness of that blanket. We're putting more carbon dioxide and other gases, but mainly carbon dioxide at the moment, into the atmosphere.
And how long have we been aware of the man-made reasons for this blanket getting
hundreds of years? This has been proven in labs in the 1850s. Actually, the first person to discover this was Eunice Foote, so a woman.
Wow.
And she basically demonstrated that certain gases have heat-trapping properties.
And our way of life changed so much. Things are no longer just right.
But Ash, there is a plan. Thanks to 6,000 scientists who brought this terrible tale to all the world leaders in Paris and said, alrighty, we need to keep the world under 1.5 degrees of warming in this century. And 195 countries, Australia included, all made this epic pinky promise to say, all right, we're in it together, we're going to keep things from going wrong.
Okay, cool. Love it. Pinky promise, though? I mean...
Not exactly binding.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you can break a country's finger. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Paris Agreement is all online. You can read the whole thing. Just Google it.
The global goals set up by this Paris Pinky Promise are halve our global emissions in the next 10 years, no more emissions in 30 years' time. So if you've heard the 10 years to fix the planet thing, that's where it comes from.
This is also probably the wrong question. How long have we got?
Ooh, I struggle with this question. So there's been a push in recent times about the critical decade. This has come from a number of sources, both Australian and international, that we need to act now. That's important to get that message across that the time is now. However, I also think there's a little bit too much emphasis placed on that because it can incite a bit of fear in some people that, well, crap, if I don't act now, we're done. Like, we're just basically all going to die. What's the point? It can induce some sort of anxiety, I guess. So even if for some reason we can't reduce our emissions as much as possible right now, even doing that in 10 or 20 years' time will have an impact down the line.
Okay, so it's not like 10 years till the apocalypse, but we've got to do everything in our power to quit fossil fuels within the next 10 years, or I guess everyone can just gang up on us and break our metaphorical pinkies.
We need to stop burning fossil fuels, but it's hard to achieve that if there aren't incentives, from governments or, other organisations. And that's, I think, where the most frustrating part is. Like, people in positions of power have, a moral responsibility and, they're also able to make huge changes that help everyone. But that just doesn't seem to be happening nearly as much as it should.
Are you angry? I hope you are frigging angry.
Jess, what are you doing?
I'm doing retro aerobics, like Jane Fonda style aerobics.
Are you wearing a leotard?
It's like, this is one of my favourite things to do. Ash, it's like my toe harp. It helps me feel really good. It's good for my body. It makes me laugh the whole time. But I'm actually, in all seriousness, I'm doing it while I'm watching Jane Fonda's Fire Drill Fridays. Have you heard about this? I'm going to share my screen.
Jane Fonda, the aerobics
Jane
legend.
Fonda in her 80s is a climate hero. Hold on, I'm going to share my screen and show you this Fire Drill Fridays.
This is a collective crisis that requires collective action.
We hold the power to change.
So every Friday in January, Jane Fonda led these epic climate demonstrations on the street of Washington. She teamed up with Greenpeace and had this huge turnout. And then since the pandemic, she's been doing it virtually.
And it must be a just transition that leaves no workers behind.
Amazing. I love that. Okay, so is this making you feel better or?
Yes, but I still feel really frustrated. I feel like we've got this perfect roadmap, but it doesn't really seem like we're following it. I don't know. How do you feel?
Look, I'm actually feeling a little bit embarrassed and on behalf of my country, just because I Googled whether or not we were on track to meet the Paris climate target. And then I hovered over Australia in this digital map and it said in capital letters, insufficient.
Okay, I think we should channel Jane Fonda.
What, and put out aerobics VCRs?
No, get some help from Greenpeace.
Wait, we'll just knock on Greenpeace's door and be like, hey, guys, how do I save the planet?
Hi. Hello. I'm Jess.
Hi. I'm Ash.
We did. And not only did they answer the door, but the CEO of Greenpeace Australia Pacific invited us around to his home for a cup of tea.
To make our home and your table.
Some sort of hippie herbal?
Oh, hippie herbal would be great.
Well, my dad is David Ritter. He's the CEO of Greenpeace Australia and Pacific.
While David was making us a cup of what he calls hippie herbal, we tested out our COVID-safe podcast setup with his kids and asked them how they'd save the planet while he was brewing the tea.
Sneaking into Parliament and dressing up as all of the politicians. And then I'd say that we're going to stop using fossil fuels and gather all of the money that we got from burning it and just put that into solar panels and electric cars and just trying to get rid of greenhouse gases.
Can I vote for you? Yes.
Yeah, you got my vote for sure.
We're not a party yet.
Yeah, no, because you're in year 2.
And year 6.
So yeah, we're having a laugh and feeling inspired by the future generations.
And then we're like, hey, we need to get back to our counselling session with David here because the anxiety and overwhelm is definitely still there.
This was a whole bunch of these reasons why Ash and I got together were ways that we could be like, okay, well, how do we keep each other trucking but be actually doing productive things at the same time?
Particularly when, we were shut inside from smoke and then we were shut inside from COVID.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that we were just miles from each other all grieving was, that was just the predominant feeling of those months. I just felt so charged up to do something, but so far from being able to do anything. Can I just ask, like, maybe the question that I wanted to ask back then, which is all hope lost?
No, all hope isn't lost, but there's also no reason not to grieve. But we need to balance grief and belief simultaneously. And I mean, I don't like talking about wars because Greenpeace, it doesn't sort of fit that much. But my mum and dad were Second World War generation kids. My father escaped on one of the children's trains out of Czechoslovakia. He was 14 years old. Virtually all of his family were murdered. He met my mother in England. They both survived the bombings, and they're both passed now. But one of the things that my mother always talked about was you lost friends you knew weren't coming back. You lost family. You lost places that were destroyed. But there was an abiding iron determination that there was something through it on the other side. Now, I've been part of this Australian community we're seeing the reef bleach, we're seeing what's happening to the mangroves, the kelp forests in the south, the Murray-Darling, 35 million hectares of our country burnt over spring and summer. This is a blitz of the natural world that we are seeing. But we also know, the very best science tells us, that we can also come out through the other side of this with something that is as beautiful as anything in the cosmos. And one of the things the scientists cannot measure is the speed of politics. And politics can change very, very fast. I'm old enough to remember when the Cold War seemed like it was a permanent condition. I'm old enough to remember when apartheid seemed like it was a thing that was going to be there forever. And these things have been swept away to the dustbin of history. And so the fossil fuel order shall also pass. Climate change is not a binary. The world is inherently unpredictable. History is non-linear. And above all, hope is having a plan of what to do. And, we've got a plan of what to do. We've got a plan.
Okay, so let's just set the scene here. We're both being really COVID safe at the other end of this table, separated by our DIY sneeze guard frame window things.
But I was patting his dog a lot, so maybe not that COVID safe. And also feeding them all the treats.
And the wind's howling outside. We've got our cup of tea. We are getting into it.
It went from 0 to 100 real quick. It's such a Goliath of a problem. How do you come up with a strategy for how you're going to attack it as an organisation?
Well, strategy is a way of making sense of complex problems. So the greatest threat right now is the climate emergency. The number one driver of the climate emergency is the use of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. Within Australia, we know that Australia is the third largest exporter of emissions. We know that Australia is the largest exporter of coal, and the most important thing for us to do is to kick coal as fast as we possibly can, and then gas is really coming up on us now as well.
Australia is the coal capital of the world. Sometimes we get the impression that little old Australia can't have much of an impact on the global scene. We do. We are punching way above our weight in emissions.
And if we look at our emissions per capita or per person, ours is 3 times higher than the global average.
The next step is to say, well, how do you make the interventions? And we know there are interventions that we can make about speeding up the retirement of Australia's 22 coal-burning power stations. There are interventions that can be made around no new coal or gas mining.
As Australians, does that mean that our strategy should also be to sort of bring an end to coal and to speed along renewables?
Absolutely. Bang on. That should be the strategy of every Australian who really wants to get in and use their power to the maximum impact.
So we need to retire coal-burning power stations, no new gas or coal mining. I mean, that's big. How do people like us do this?
What is the realistic thing that Jess and I can do? How can people like us who, we're not professional activists at all, what should we be dedicating our concentration and our time to?
So let's think, first of all, of the scale of the problem, right? we've got to think about this in a global sense, that this is a global process that's being driven by these massive systems of production and consumption and transport and energy. And clearly just us making our own individual choices is not going to be enough. And I think we kind of all know that in our hearts. But we also know that we've got to make the systems change, right?
Okay. We know in our hearts that just changing our consumer behaviour isn't going to be enough. Introducing systemic change.
Well, so systemic change means that rather than a proportion of the population have just changed their consumption habits in the next 10 years, that Australia has shifted all of its electricity generation in the next 10 years to clean energy, something that multiple studies have now said that we can do relatively easily.
Hey, Ash, you know your little bedtime story when you're talking about the Goldilocks zone?
Yeah, dog.
It's actually the baby bear zone. Goldilocks is the system.
Huh?
So Goldilocks is the fossil fuel era.
Wait, so Goldilocks, so like little golden ringlety Goldilocks is actually the fossil fuel era. Cool, got it.
Yes, and this Goldilocks is lying in our just right bed and is so tied up in our political system, our media, our way of life, that you and I are losing sleep over all these little individual things, like how much we're driving or changing our light bulbs. It's just not going to make a dent. It's kind of like all the bears saying like, oh, well, I guess I could just sleep on the floor.
Oh, yes, so what we're doing now is we're like following Goldilocks or like the fossil fuel era. We're following it around the house, cleaning up after its trail of destruction, when maybe we need to get it to stop destroying everything.
So park the individual thinking. The only way we're going to bring on systemic change is through collective action. Mama bear, Papa bear, baby bear, all the little neighbour bears in town working together to boot Goldilocks out the window and start cleaning up the house.
Okay, so I get it. Collective action is something that we need to do. We can't think of ourselves as just individuals. But then what is maybe the enemy of collective action?
Well, look, the enemy of collective action, first of all, I guess, is just nothing. It's just, well, screw it. I'll just be endlessly ironic, or I'll retreat into escapism, or I'll just consume stuff and I'll try and consume a bit better. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't get us there. Or it's to retreat into nihilism. Oh, it's all over. There's nothing we can do. Completely untrue. So it's putting all of those kind of individualist behaviours to one side. So how do we feel big? And how do we act as big as we possibly can? Let's map Jess and Ash.
Are you ready to map yourself, Jess?
Are you ready to power map yourself, Ash?
I mean, my kids have a lot of pens and pencils. If that's what's holding you back, we can get the pens and pencils out.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, is this Crafternoon? Crafting the future? Alrighty, Aphrodite.
Ready to do a power map?
I'm so ready for this. So, a power map is a tool that organisations like Greenpeace use to map out relationships and networks of influence when they're planning social or environmental campaigns. And we're just going to do one for normal people, like ourselves. Paper, check. Pesto on my paper, double check. It's on both sides.
Ash and I took David's power mapping instructions to a cafe and had one of the best little brekkie dates
We've got some
ever.
fancy highlighters as well, just in case you need those. Yeah, and we're putting those instructions on the Heaps Better website. There's a link in the show notes.
Okay, so the first thing we do is we do a what.
What are the things that are my set of special powers? Clearly you know how to do podcasts, but everyone knows how to do different things. So it's worthwhile making down a list of stuff you know how to do.
What are we good at?
What are we good at?
And what do we like doing, so we know we're going to do more of it. So that's our what.
Shall we take a minute and write our whats and then
Yeah,
discuss?
I think so. What?
So what are you good
It's really nice to do this one with a buddy who can point out what you're good at.
Yeah, like I used to work at a radio station with Ash and I know that she's really good at interviewing people.
You're super organised. You love making things happen and getting stuff together.
Oh, shucks. That sort of thing.
I like birds. I really like birds.
Really?
But this was
Oh my God, you're a twitcher.
And then we define the where.
Read these out again.
And if you think about the where, it's everything you're part of. What sports clubs have you ever been part of? What social clubs are you part of? What street do you live on?
Do you think we need to have a really big relationship to these places that we're talking about?
No, I think it's anywhere that you have a connection to.
I'm in a group called Just Dance, and we meet on Mondays and just dance.
Seriously?
Yeah.
All of those what's all have carbon footprints, and they have carbon footprints that are much bigger than any individual.
Radio station.
So I had things like my stint in politics and the local radio station where I met you, Jess.
Yes, and we both know the team of podcasters at Audiocraft who I work with.
One of whom had a friend who worked at Greenpeace.
And all these colleagues or neighbours or friends of friends, they're our circles of influence.
This is actually an epic list when you start to like go through all these
Totally.
random connections.
So now you're cooking, right? You've defined what's your superpower, and you've started to define the areas of your influence. Now, once you've got those things mapped out, you've got the terrain in front of you, and wow, boy, there are so many things that you can do. Like the fantastic regional hospital that said they weren't going to accept money from sponsorship from coal mining companies. How inspirational was that? It always comes back to that exercise in mapping of where you are in the world, who you know, how you can reach people, and what you love doing.
So beyond just Ash and I making that pinky promise to share information between us, we could tap into all these brilliant people that we kind of already knew.
And then it turned into a podcast. So anyone in the world could learn along with us.
And you're doing that for the why. Because the why is not about, we got to stop bad stuff. The why is because the world is beautiful, and we want the world to become a more beautiful place in the future.
I don't understand the why. Can you make the why make sense to me?
Why are you doing this in the first place?
Why am I trying to save the planet?
Yeah. Why are you trying to save the planet? Why are you even sitting here putting the effort into doing a power map? Why are you giving a shit? Like, why did we go to David Ritter? Why did we even decide to start this podcast? And it's because, in David Ritter's words,
we want an earth capable of nurturing life in all of its magnificent diversity. So all of us are doing this not because we want to make each other feel bad about da-da-da, but because the world is magnificent and we can increase the quantum of justice in that world. And so that is the why.
I would like to come back to my why that is like, it ties together my past and my future. And like connects with my heart. And that is when I put my I'm literally gonna cry. When I put my head under the water at the Great Barrier Reef when I was a kid. And it just blew my tiny mind, you know? It was just so magical, and I felt connected to it all. And I was able to browse this like life library, and I don't want to turn up to the library one day and there's only one book to read, you know? And I want to be able to see children enjoying it the same way I did, you know? That's why for me.
And I just became a godmother twice. Well, a hairy fairy guide mother is the term that I've been given. One of them was born during lockdowns in Victoria, and I'm in New South Wales, so I haven't been able to meet her yet with the borders being closed. But a big one of my whys is that, like a lot of people, my work all disappeared overnight during the first lockdowns. And with all that time on my hands and being stuck in one place, I started really noticing all the birds around me and trying to recognise them by their different songs. It's like I aged 40 years overnight, but I love it. And I want my little guide babies to be able to hear this beautiful symphony of birdsong too.
Jess, I have a present for you.
Ash, is that a currawong?
Yeah, I recorded it just in the park near my house. Oh. It's amazing what you can hear in the middle of the city when you actually listen.
if you are thinking of that why rather than then it starts to be a blessing, this work. It starts to be work that you are doing with joy. With joy.
So are you saying that as the CEO of Greenpeace, you don't go into work every day thinking, let's make the bastards pay, we're going to get them, you know?
I've loved Greenpeace since I was a kid, and no matter how hard the day is, I still feel like I'm a school kid sort of skipping to work. I don't quite get to do it when we're working from home. But the ethos is fundamentally one of love. It's love for the natural world, and it is a love for the miraculousness of people. You know, you if you work within a movement and you give yourself over to that, you are all the time refreshed by the realization that people working together can do just about anything.
So we were talking about collective action wins with David, and like the global boycotts that helped to end apartheid in South Africa was one example that came up. And then David mentioned one that happened in Australia, the fight for the Bight. Jess, you were part of that.
I also was living down the Great Ocean Road the last few years, and my community was paddling out in paddle outs down, you know, around Torquay and fighting for the Bight, you know. And it felt
and
like...
you're asking me what to do. Well, can we tell this story?
Okay, so why were you paddling out?
All right, so we were paddling out in the water in protest against a Norwegian oil company called Equinox, and they had plans to drill for oil in the Great Australian Bight. And if there'd been an oil spill down there, the impacts would have been completely devastating. I don't know if you remember this and if you saw...
Yeah, dude, I saw these maps that scientists had drawn up. They showed how the oil spills, just because of currents, would have happened in the Bight under South Australia and then curved all the way around Victoria and all the way up the coast to northern New South Wales.
Exactly. So it would have had devastating impacts for all these local communities, like their tourism, the fisheries, the local ecology.
Wow.
But not only that, Equinox environmental plan had pretty much failed to consult with traditional owners along the South Australian coast.
My name is Sue Hasseldine. I'm a First Nations Googler woman from the far west coast of South Australia. My old people would spend the winter months out bush. Then during the summer months, they would come down to the ocean where there was so much food.
This is Gugitha elder, Aunty Sue Hasseldine, and she sent this spoken letter asking Equinox to reconsider their plans to drill for oil.
We know you can't eat, breathe, or drink money. Drilling for oil can only mean disaster. It would be a catastrophe if anything happened to our pristine waters and our way of life. No drilling in our Great Australian Bight. We don't want you here. We don't want your oil rigs. We don't want your oil spills. Don't ignore us because we're not going to go away. We are here. We have been here for thousands and thousands of years, and we will still be here when the oil age is over.
Aunty Sue didn't get a response. More people around the coast start hearing about Equinox plans and jump on board this fight for the Bight.
I had no idea, and it was like from the town I was from. So I was pretty shocked, and I was like, right, we've got to do something about this.
This is Grace. She's a high school student from Apollo Bay, and she organised her whole town to take to the harbour in a flotilla in protest.
And when we got down there, it was just awesome. People just started flooding in. There was just little kids all screaming, fight for the Bight, and all the older people, and which was really, really good.
And meanwhile, in the town where I was living, a couple of local surfers get together and have this big dream for a paddle out.
Our local Fight for the Bight campaign started like all good stories, in the local pub close to midnight, and only really a week or two before our first paddle out.
This is Jarrah.
The team, crew and multiple friends pitched in their various skills, whether it was social media, organisation.
Then the local Surfrider Foundation gets behind it and is like, we'll sort out all your council permits so you can make this an official event. Pro surfers started getting behind it. Journalists start covering it. All these people around Australia hear about it and want in too. And this little dream for a paddle out turns into a national day of action where there are something like 50 paddle outs happening all over Australia and even in Norway.
We tapped into something that the local community cared about deeply, and they came out in numbers to support it, from kids to grandparents to pets. People supported it in whatever way they could.
And all these people are just normal people who'd never organised a protest before, high school students even.
And it really just goes to show what, collectively we can achieve. None of this would have been possible if any one of us had set out to coordinate these paddle outs.
And then in February 2020, Equinox announced that they were pulling out. They were cancelling their plans to drill for oil in the Bight.
I was midway through a SAC or a test at school, and then I went to the bathroom, and one of my friends who organised it with me, she came with, and she looked at her phone when we were in there, and she's like, "Oh my God." I'm like, "What?" She just told me, she was like, "Oh my God, Equinox pulled out of the Bight." I was like, "What? Are you joking? That's awesome." And we just started celebrating in the school bathroom.
It's an amazing story. I mean, you were part of a globally significant defeat of a fossil fuel company. How could you have been keeping this silent? Go and ask some bloke what he thinks when you actually know the answer. I mean...
It was very exciting. But I agree, it felt so exciting to be even just paddling out with the 100-odd people at our little beach on those days that we did. But I also know that we were only one piece of the puzzle.
Let's think of it as a patchwork quilt of refusal to big oil that was put down from Albany to Botany Bay. Because that's what happened, right? We had First Nations people, the Mirning mob, who said, you are not drilling for oil in the middle of our whale dreaming. We had surfers paddling out saying, these breaks, they're too important. We had scientists saying, this is madness. We had people inside the companies that were leaking the spill modelling. We had journalists who were saying, well, this is one of the most important stories around. We had local councillors saying, we are not going to have this here. We had the environmental organisations. I mean, Greenpeace was big in this, but let's do a shout out to our mates and our colleagues at the Wilderness Society and at ACF and at AYCC and at SEED and everyone else who was involved. And this patchwork of communities and surfers and kids at schools in Apollo Bay and Kangaroo Island and elsewhere who just said, nah, not going to happen. And it hasn't, and it isn't, and it won't. We did it collectively. You ask what collective action is. That was collective action. We closed a frontier to big oil forever.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there, Jess. Is that a good news story in 2020?
Yes. Yes, we needed it so bad.
I just love that it's not only environmental activists, it's everyone just saying, nah.
Okay, let's get into action. Share this podcast with a mate. Then sit down and do a power map with them. You just need one sweet hour of time, a couple of pens and pencils.
It doesn't take that long, and honestly, it feels really good. It'll show you how you can get into climate action from right where you already are.
Our mates at Greenpeace have helped turn all this info into a simple step-by-step action plan. You can download it from the website greenpeace.org.au/heapsbetter. There's a link in the show notes of this podcast too.
We've got a plan, but there is still so much we need to know.
Can we go from being a coal superpower to a renewable superpower?
Spoiler alert, we can, but can we get there fast enough? And can people like you and I make it happen faster?
Subscribe to Heaps Better on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. And if you like what you heard, please rate and review this podcast. It's a huge help.
Heaps Better is a podcast made by us, Jess Hamilton and Ash Berdebes, with Greenpeace Australia Pacific and Audiocraft. The mixing engineer is Adam Connelly, EP is Kate Montague, and the creative lead at Greenpeace is Ella Colley.
A huge thank you to the Greenpeace team for getting us out of the weeds and showing us the bigger picture, especially David Ritter and his awesome kids.
So what do you guys want to do when we get out of school? I mean, are you going to break into Parliament?
Yes, yeah. Or if we get bored, just go on some interview some kids about what to do.
She just went better on you.
I don't know. What does better mean?
Thank you to Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick and all the scientists out there working so hard for so long to tell us what we need to know.
Thanks to Grace, Sue, Damo, Jarrah, and the entire Fight for the Bight community, whether you were using your voice to shout out loud or acting more quietly behind the scenes.
And thank you for coming with us. We are heaps better together.